You ever get that feeling when you buy your dream home, the one you've worked your entire life for, that it's just too good to be true? Well, I'm here to tell you that sometimes that feeling is dead on. And it usually arrives in the form of an HOA president driving a white Lexus SUV with a personalized license plate that reads, Boss Lady. This is the story of how my HOA president tried to seize my private property, call the cops on me, and ended up in the back of one of my own patrol cars. It's a wild one, so grab a drink. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to see how far these stories travel. For 35 years, I'd been a cop. I started as a rookie walking a beat in the city's toughest neighborhood and worked my way up, rung by painful rung, until I made commander. It's a job that grinds you down. You see the worst of humanity, you fill out paperwork until your eyes cross, and you live on bad coffee and adrenaline. My wife, bless her soul, had always dreamed of us retiring to a house on a lake, a place where the only sirens were the ones from Greek mythology, luring sailors to their doom, not the ones signaling another domestic dispute or a 5-car pileup. We'd saved, we'd planned, we'd spent countless weekends looking at properties. Then, we lost her. Cancer is a thief that takes more than just a life. It takes future memories. I was adrift. The job, once my calling, now just felt like a heavy coat I couldn't take off. So, a year after she passed, I decided to honor her dream. I took an early retirement, sold our home in the city, and went looking for her lake house. I found it in a quiet, upscale development about an hour outside the metro area. It wasn't just on a lake, it was the house on the lake. The property was a unique, pie-shaped lot at the very end of a cul-de-sac. The narrow end was on the street, and it fanned out to encompass a huge stretch of shoreline, including the only gentle, walkable slope down to a small, private cove on what was otherwise a fairly deep and undeveloped body of water. The house itself was a sprawling, single-story mansion, maybe a bit too big for one man, but it had a magnificent deck overlooking the water. It was perfect. It was our dream, and I was going to live it for the both of us. During the purchase process, my lawyer, a sharp guy named Ben who'd handled all my affairs for years, noted the property's unique standing. Its riparian rights were ironclad, established decades before the Lakeside Meadows development was even a glimmer in some developer's eye. The property line extended 10 feet into the lake bed. I didn't just own the shore, I owned the shallows. The seller was an elderly man moving into assisted living, and he mentioned offhandedly that the neighbors sometimes used the path to get to the water. I thought nothing of it, chalking it up to friendly, informal neighborhood courtesy, something I was fine with, continuing on a case-by-case basis. I was buying a home, not a fortress. Or so I thought. The first month was bliss. I spent my days unpacking, organizing my workshop, and just sitting on the deck, watching the light change on the water. I met a few of the neighbors. There was David, a retired surgeon on my left, and the Millers, a young family with 2 kids on my right. They were all perfectly pleasant. Then came the official welcome. A crisp knock on the door revealed a woman who seemed poured into a pastel pink Lululemon outfit. She was in her late 40s, with aggressively blonde hair pulled into a severe ponytail and a face that looked like it had never experienced a moment of genuine surprise. Her white Lexus was parked, slightly askew in my driveway. "You must be Alex," she said, her voice a little too loud, a little too bright. "I'm Brenda Clark, president of the Lakeside Meadows Homeowners Association. We are so thrilled to have you join our little community." She handed me a thick, spiral-bound welcome packet that looked more like a legal treatise. "This has all of our covenants, rules, and a schedule of our community events," she chirped. "You'll want to pay special attention to the landscaping and trash receptacle guidelines. We're very proud of our neighborhood's pristine appearance." I thanked her, assuring her I was a quiet neighbor and a stickler for rules myself. This seemed to please her. Wonderful. And we're especially excited to have this property occupied by someone younger. Mr. Henderson was a dear, of course, but he wasn't able to maintain the lake access path properly. The HOA board has actually budgeted to have it re-graveled and to add a permanent sign. She smiled, a wide, toothy gesture that didn't reach her eyes. "We'll be having the crew out next Tuesday." It wasn't a question, it was a declaration. I could feel the old professional instincts kicking in, the slight shift in posture, the calm, measured tone I used when de-escalating a situation. "Brenda, it's a pleasure to meet you," I started, keeping my voice friendly. "And I appreciate the welcome. However, I think there may be a misunderstanding. I reviewed the property survey and the deed extensively before purchase. The entire lakefront, including the path you're referring to, is private property, part of this lot. There's no public or community easement on record." The change was instantaneous. The bright chipper facade cracked and fell away, revealing something hard and cold underneath. Her smile tightened. "Mr. Henderson always allowed access. It's for the community. It's a community lake." I gave a slight conciliatory shrug. "I can understand how that might have been the informal arrangement with Mr. Henderson, but legally, it's private land. I'm happy to speak with neighbors if they want to use it occasionally, but I can't have an HOA building infrastructure on my property. I'm sure you can understand the liability issues." "No," she said flatly, the single word hanging in the air like a gunshot. "I don't think you understand. This is Lakeside Meadows. We are a community. That access benefits everyone, and the HOA board has decided it will be improved. I'll see you Tuesday." She turned on her heel, marched back to her white chariot, and drove away, leaving a faint scent of overpriced perfume and entitlement in her wake. I stood in my doorway, holding the ridiculously thick welcome packet, and sighed. The peace and quiet had lasted exactly 34 days. I looked out at the tranquil water and had a sinking feeling that I hadn't retired from law enforcement at all. I'd just relocated the precinct to my front yard. The first battle of what I would later call the War of the Waterfront had been declared, and I hadn't even finished unpacking my coffee maker. I went inside, poured myself a stiff bourbon, and for the first time in my career, started reading HOA covenants. It was drier than any legal code I'd ever encountered, but I knew my enemy now. And if 35 years on the force had taught me anything, it was this: know your enemy, know their rules, and document everything. The war was on. The Tuesday Brenda had designated for the path improvement project came and went without a single gravel truck appearing. I had taken the precaution of parking my large pickup truck across the head of the path, just in case. It was a silent, inanimate statement, but Brenda wasn't the type to let a challenge go unanswered. Her response came a week later, not in person, but in the official Lakeside Meadows monthly newsletter, which appeared magically in my mailbox. It was a glossy, professionally printed affair, filled with photos of the yard of the month, a manicured monstrosity of box hedges and unnaturally green turf, and reminders about recycling bin placement. And there, on the front page, was an article penned by Brenda herself, titled "Community Spirit and Neighborly Conduct." It was a masterpiece of passive aggression. Without naming me, it spoke of new residents who may not yet understand the unique, shared values of Lakeside Meadows. It lamented the unfortunate trend of individualism and the privatization of what has long been considered a shared community treasure. It ended with a thinly veiled threat. The HOA board is currently exploring all options to ensure that long-standing community traditions are respected and upheld for the benefit of all homeowners who contribute to the beauty and value of our neighborhood. I read it twice, a slow burn starting in my gut. It wasn't just a threat, it was a propaganda piece, designed to paint me as a villain to neighbors I hadn't even met yet. This wasn't just a dispute anymore. She was trying to isolate me. My next move was to formalize my position. I had Ben, my lawyer, draft a polite but unequivocal letter to the HOA board. It cited the specific legal description of my property from the county registrar's office, quoted the section on riparian rights, and stated clearly that no easement for community access existed. It affirmed my right to quiet enjoyment of my property and stated that any attempt by the HOA or its contractors to perform work on my land would be considered trespass. For good measure, It also noted that encouraging other residents to cross my property could open the HOA up to significant liability. We sent it via certified mail, return receipt requested. The little green card came back a week later, signed in a spiky, aggressive script, B. Clark. The fines started a few days after that. The first was a $50 citation for improperly parked vehicle. My pickup truck, still strategically placed near the path, was cited for being on a non-paved surface. The two driver's side wheels were about 6 inches onto the grass. The accompanying photo, clearly taken from the street with a telephoto lens, was so grainy it was almost abstract art. I paid it, but I also installed a comprehensive security system. Not just a doorbell camera, but 4 high-definition, night vision-capable cameras covering every angle of my property, with a special focus on the lake path and my driveway. The data was stored locally on a server in my office and backed up to a secure cloud service. I was a cop. I knew the value of unimpeachable evidence. The next fine was for unapproved signage. After the newsletter incident, I had placed a simple, professionally made sign at the head of the path. It read, "Private property, no trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted." Apparently, this sign violated a covenant about the size and style of yard signs. Another $100. I paid that one too, but I sent another certified letter from Ben, this time asking for the specific covenant clause I had violated and requesting the official HOA process for sign approval. The response was a copy of the sign covenant with the relevant section highlighted in pink and a terse note saying all sign applications must be reviewed at the next monthly board meeting. The game was clear. She was going to bleed me dry with petty, procedural nonsense. It was time to gather intelligence. I started taking walks around the neighborhood in the evenings. I made a point of being friendly, waving at everyone. Most people were pleasant. I struck up a few conversations. That's how I met George. George was in his late 70s, a retired engineer who had lived in Lakeside Meadows since it was built. He was watering his prize-winning roses when I walked by. I complimented them, and it was like I had turned a key in a lock. George invited me into his immaculate garage for a beer. "Saw that piece in the newsletter?" he said, handing me a cold bottle. "That's Brenda for you. All sweetness and light until you tell her no. Then the fangs come out." George became my inside source, my neighborhood oracle. He told me the history of the lake access. "Old man Henderson, who you bought from, he was a lonely guy after his wife died," George explained. "He didn't mind a few of the families with kids using the path to go for a swim. It was never a big deal. The old HOA president, a fella named Mark, was reasonable. He understood it was Henderson's property, and everyone treated it as a privilege, not a right. Then Mark moved away 2 years ago, and Brenda staged a coup. According to George, Brenda had always been a busybody, but with the presidential gavel in her hand, she transformed. She saw the HOA not as a service organization, but as her personal fiefdom. The board was stacked with her cronies, a couple of meek individuals who were terrified of her, and another guy who seemed to be her second in command in all things unpleasant. "She loves rules," George said, taking a sip of his beer. "Not for herself, of course. For everyone else. She's the kind of person who'd measure your lawn with a ruler." This information was gold. It confirmed that the long-standing community tradition was actually an informal courtesy, granted by one man, now being twisted into an inalienable right by a power-hungry administrator. George also gave me a crucial piece of advice. Every homeowner has the right to review the HOA's records, including financials and meeting minutes. You just have to submit a formal request. She'll make it difficult, but she can't legally deny you. If I were you, I'd start there. See what she's really been up to. That night I drafted another formal request, this time for access to the last 3 years of HOA financial statements, vendor contracts, and all board meeting minutes. I had a hunch that Brenda's obsession with control wasn't just about a path to a lake. Power trips like hers were often fueled by something more tangible. As a commander, I'd overseen my fair share of fraud investigations. The patterns were always the same: opaque bookkeeping, no-bid contracts, and a leader who reacted with extreme aggression to any questions about money. I sent the request to the entire board, not just Brenda, again via certified mail. I didn't know what I would find, but my gut told me the fight over the lake was just the surface. Brenda had dug a trench, and I had a feeling that if I followed it, I wouldn't just find the source of our conflict, but the skeletons of a half-dozen others as well. The investigation had officially begun. Brenda's response to my request for HOA records was a masterclass in bureaucratic obstruction. First, she claimed the request was improperly formatted. I refiled it, using the exact language specified in the state's Property Owner Association Act. Then, she informed me that I would have to pay a reasonable fee for the compilation and copying of the documents, a fee she calculated to be an eye-watering $475. It was an absurd amount, meant to be a deterrent. I wrote the check without comment and sent it with another letter from Ben, stating that we expected the documents within the legally mandated 10 business days. Finally, on the 10th day, a large box arrived. It was filled with hundreds of pages of documents, but they were a complete mess. The financial statements were missing summaries, the contracts were poorly redacted, and the meeting minutes were selective. Entire meetings were summarized in a single, uninformative paragraph. It was a data dump, designed to be overwhelming and useless. Brenda had complied with the letter of the law, but not the spirit. She had underestimated me. For me, this was like coming home, sifting through disorganized evidence, finding the thread, connecting the dots. This was the work I actually enjoyed as a police commander. I spent the next 2 weeks in my home office, which I had begun to refer to as the war room. I bought a fresh set of highlighters, a case of sticky notes, and a giant whiteboard. I cross-referenced every invoice with every vendor contract and every line item in the budget. I slowly, painstakingly, began to build a picture of how Brenda's HOA operated, and it was ugly. The landscaping contract was the first major red flag. For the past 2 years, since Brenda took over, the contract had been held by a company called Lushscapes LLC. Their rates were nearly double the previous company's, and for what George confirmed was a lower quality of service. A quick search of state business records revealed the owner of Lushscapes LLC, a Mr. Darrell Peterson. A little more digging on social media confirmed my suspicion. Darrell Peterson was Brenda Clark's brother. She was funneling HOA dues into her brother's pocket. The meeting minutes for the vote on that contract were conveniently vague, simply stating, "The board approved a new landscaping vendor based on the recommendation of the Beautification Committee," a committee chaired by Brenda herself. There were other things. Questionable consulting fees paid to a company that seemed to exist only on paper. An unusually high budget for legal services, despite the HOA not being involved in any public litigation. It was a classic, small-scale grift, run by someone who believed no one was smart enough or brave enough to look. I documented everything, creating a separate, pristine file for my findings, complete with copies of the state business filings and screenshots from her brother's very public Facebook page, where he'd posted pictures of his brand new boat, thanking his best client ever. While this financial deep dive was happening, the situation with the lakefront was escalating. My private property sign was vandalized spray painted with a crude word. I saved the security footage. A few days later, a group of teenagers, emboldened by the ongoing dispute, held a loud party in my cove, leaving a mess of beer cans and food wrappers. I cleaned it up, but I also called the non-emergency line and filed a police report for trespassing, making sure to provide the officer with the video evidence. It was about creating a paper trail. Each incident was a brick in the wall of evidence I was building. The final straw came in the form of an email blast to the entire neighborhood from Brenda. It was an invitation to the Lakeside Meadows annual summer kickoff, BBQ, and Lake Day. The email was jubilant in tone, promising food, games, and fun for the whole family. And then, there was the line that made my blood run cold. As always, community access to the lake will be via the historic path at the end of the cul-de-sac. Come on down and enjoy the beautiful water that makes our neighborhood so special. She had thrown down the gauntlet in the most public and reckless way imaginable. She wasn't just encouraging trespassing, she was organizing and advertising it. This was no longer a petty squabble. This was a deliberate, premeditated act of defiance against a legal property owner, orchestrated by the head of a formal organization. I printed the email and added it to my file. I then had Ben draft one final letter. It was addressed to Brenda and each member of the HOA board individually. It stated, in the clearest possible terms, that the planned event constituted a coordinated effort to violate state trespassing laws. It informed them that the property was under 24/7 video surveillance, and that I had already filed a report with the county sheriff's office regarding previous incidents. It concluded with a stark warning. Any individual who crosses the clearly marked property line on the day of the event will be considered a criminal trespasser. Any organizer of said event will be held liable for soliciting and conspiring to commit this offense. Law enforcement will be present, and we will pursue all available legal remedies, both criminal and civil. I sent a copy to the county sheriff, a man I knew professionally, along with a note explaining the situation. I didn't ask for any favors. I just gave him a heads up that a civilian situation at my address might require a response on the day of the event, and I provided him with a summary of the evidence I'd collected. He called me back an hour later. "Alex," he said, his voice weary. "Oh, A's. It's always something. Just do what you have to do. My guys will back you up. The law is the law." Brenda's response to the lawyer's letter was to double down. She sent another email to the neighborhood. "Please do not be deterred by the aggressive and baseless legal threats from our new neighbor," it read. "The HOA stands by our community's right to access the lake. We are a strong, united community, and we will not be bullied. See you all on Saturday." She had called my bluff. She believed I was just one man, and she was the leader of 100 home army. She believed her self-proclaimed authority outweighed deeds, surveys, and the actual law. She was about to receive the most abrupt education of her life. The stage was set, the cameras were rolling, and I was ready. Saturday was coming. Saturday dawned bright and painfully clear, the kind of perfect early summer day that practically begs for a barbecue. By 10 a.m., I could hear the sounds of the party starting up in the common area park, down the street music, laughter, the sizzle of a grill. I sat in my quiet living room, nursing a cup of coffee and watching the 4-pane split screen of my security monitor. The view of the path was crystal clear. I had placed 2 new, very official-looking no trespassing signs at the entrance, hammered firmly into the ground. My phone was on the table next to me, along with a folder containing my property deed, the survey map, and copies of the certified letters I'd sent. Around 11:30 a.m., the first explorers arrived. It was a family I didn't recognize, a dad, a mom, and 2 young kids in swimsuits, carrying towels and inflatable toys. They hesitated at the signs, the father looking back towards the party, a flicker of uncertainty on his face. This was the moment of truth. I stepped out my front door and walked calmly towards them, keeping my hands visible and my demeanor non-threatening. "Folks, I'm sorry," I said, my voice level. "I know there's been some confusing information sent out, but this is private property. I can't let you through." The father looked relieved, as if he'd been hoping for a reason to turn back. "Oh, okay." The email from the HOA said, "Well, it said this was the way." "I know," I replied. "The HOA is mistaken, and my lawyer is dealing with them. But for now, this land is private, and for liability reasons, I can't have anyone on it." "I'm sorry for the inconvenience," the mother nodded, grabbing her son's hand. "No, we understand. Thank you." They turned around and left, one down. A few minutes later, another couple wandered up, and I repeated the process. They were equally understanding. It seemed Brenda's propaganda hadn't fully taken root. Most people, when confronted with a direct, polite homeowner and a legal-looking sign, were perfectly reasonable. Then, at precisely 12:15 p.m., the white Lexus Escalade rolled up and parked, once again, partially in my driveway and partially on my lawn. Brenda emerged from the driver's side like a general arriving to inspect her troops. She was wearing a red polo shirt with HOA President embroidered on the chest and carrying a clipboard. She was not alone. Flanking her were two other men from the board the sycophants George had mentioned, and behind them a larger, more determined-looking group of about 15 residents, a mix of families and couples, all looking at me with varying degrees of hostility and entitlement. Brenda marched directly up to me, her face a mask of righteous fury. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You are harassing homeowners and interfering with a sanctioned community event." Behind her, a man I recognized as her board crony started pulling at one of my signs, trying to uproot it. "I'd advise you not to do that," I said, my voice dropping into the calm, authoritative tone I reserved for imminent arrests. The man froze. I turned my full attention back to Brenda. "Brenda, I'm not going to repeat myself again. You and everyone here were warned, in writing, by my attorney. This is private property. You are all currently trespassing. I'm asking you one final time to leave my property immediately." She let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a sound of pure disbelief and arrogance. "You have no authority here. I am the authority here. This is HOA common property, and we are going to the lake. Now, get out of the way, or I will have you removed." This was the moment I had been waiting for. This was the public, unequivocal statement of intent I needed. "Brenda," I said slowly, making sure to speak clearly for the benefit of the hidden microphones, "you are mistaken about the law, and you are mistaken about your authority. If you or anyone in your group takes one more step onto this property, I will be calling the sheriff's department." Her eyes widened in mock triumph. "Oh, you don't have to bother. I'll do it for you." She whipped out her phone, a gaudy pink case flashing in the sun, and dramatically dialed 911. "Yes, I need an officer at 12 Serenity Cove immediately," she squawked into the phone. "There is a man here, a new resident, who is threatening and harassing homeowners. He's blocking access to our community lakefront and refusing to let anyone pass. He's very aggressive. Please send someone right away." She hung up and gave me a smirk of pure, unadulterated victory. "There," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "They'll be here any minute to explain how things work in this neighborhood to you. You've made a very big mistake." I just stood there, impassive. I didn't say a word. I simply waited. The small crowd behind her shifted uncomfortably. A few of them had the dawning look of people who realize they've signed up for something much more serious than they intended. But Brenda was radiant with confidence, basking in the perceived glory of her imminent victory. The wail of a siren grew steadily louder, a familiar sound that, for the first time in my life, brought a small, grim smile to my face. The cavalry was coming, just not for me. 2 county sheriff's patrol cars pulled up quietly and parked on the street. 2 uniformed deputies got out. The senior of the two, a tall, broad-shouldered man with salt and pepper hair, was Sergeant Miller, a 20-year veteran I had personally promoted twice. He'd been one of my best men. His eyes met mine over the roof of Brenda's Escalade, and he gave a barely perceptible nod. Brenda practically skipped towards them. "Officers! Thank God you're here!" she exclaimed. "This man," she said, pointing a trembling, accusatory finger at me, "is causing a major disturbance." Sergeant Miller walked past her without a word and approached me. "Commander," he said, his voice formal, but with an undercurrent of respect. "Good to see you, sir, though I'm sorry it's under these circumstances. What seems to be the problem here?" The air went out of Brenda. Her jaw literally dropped. She stared at Miller, then at me, then back at Miller. The triumphant smirk on her face collapsed into a slack-jawed mask of confusion. "Commander?" she stammered. What does that mean?" Miller ignored her. I handed him the folder. "Sergeant," I said, "this is a simple matter of criminal trespass. Here is a copy of my deed and the official county survey map for this property. This woman, Ms. Brenda Clark, president of the local HOA, has organized and encouraged this group of people to illegally enter my land after being repeatedly warned, both by me and by my legal counsel, not to do so. Miller took the folder and reviewed the documents with his partner. He then walked over to the property line marker, a small iron pin in the ground, and looked back at the path. He nodded. He turned to Brenda, his face now all business. "Ma'am," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth, "I've reviewed the documents. This is, without a doubt, private property. Mr. Stevens is well within his rights to deny you access. In fact, by being on this side of the property marker," he gestured to where she stood on my lawn, "you are all currently trespassing." Brenda's face went from pale to a blotchy, furious red. "That's ridiculous. I am the HOA president. We have rules. He can't just—" "Ma'am," Miller cut her off, his voice firm. "HOA rules do not supersede state law and county property records. I am instructing you and your group to vacate this private property immediately." It was too much for her. Her sense of authority, her entire world order, had been publicly shattered in a matter of minutes. She lost it. "No!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "You work for us! We pay your salary with our taxes! You're going to listen to me!" She then made her final, fatal error. In a fit of pique, she turned and took a determined step towards the path, shoving past Miller's junior partner. "Fine! I'll go to the lake myself." That was it. Sergeant Miller's hand shot out and grabbed her arm. "Ma'am, you are under arrest." "For what?" she screeched, trying to wrench her arm away. "For starters," Miller said, smoothly maneuvering her into an arm lock and reaching for his handcuffs. "Criminal trespass. And now, also for interfering with a police officer. Put your hands behind your back." The click of the handcuffs echoed in the sudden, dead silence of the cul-de-sac. The war was over. The spectacle of Brenda Clark, HOA president and self-proclaimed boss lady, being guided into the back of a patrol car was something that would be seared into the memory of Lakeside Meadows forever. Her face, a contorted mess of rage, disbelief, and humiliation, was a far cry from the smug portrait in the community newsletter. The crowd of would-be trespassers, who just moments before had been her loyal followers, dissipated as if a spell had been broken. They scurried back to the common area, avoiding my gaze, their abandoned towels and pool noodles looking like debris from a shipwreck. The silence she left behind was profound. Sergeant Miller took my full statement and the security footage I had ready on a USB drive. "We'll process her downtown, Commander," he said. "Given the evidence you've provided, the DA will have a field day. Conspiracy, criminal trespass, interfering. She's in a world of trouble." I thanked him and his partner, and as they drove away with their cargo, I walked back into my house, the adrenaline finally starting to fade, replaced by a deep sense of exhaustion and grim satisfaction. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for Brenda. Her arrest was public record, and news travels fast in a small, gossipy community. Within hours, my phone started ringing. It was George. "Alex, my boy, what have you done?" he cackled with undisguised glee. "The neighborhood forum is on fire. People are saying she got hauled away in cuffs." I confirmed the story, and George promised to rally the reasonable folks. The narrative Brenda had so carefully crafted of me being a reclusive villain was shattered. Now, she was the one who had flagrantly broken the law and embarrassed the entire community. But I wasn't done. The criminal charges were just the punitive part. The systemic change was next. The following Monday, Ben filed a comprehensive civil lawsuit. We sued Brenda Clark personally for harassment, defamation, citing the newsletter, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We also sued the Lakeside Meadows HOA as an entity for gross negligence, vicarious liability for their president's actions, and for the financial malfeasance I had uncovered. The lawsuit included a request for a temporary and ultimately permanent injunction preventing the HOA from ever again claiming a right to my property. Attached as exhibits were copies of every piece of evidence I had meticulously collected: the videos, the threatening newsletter, the financial analysis of the Lushscapes contract, the state business records showing it was owned by her brother, the certified letters, the police report. It was an overwhelming, undeniable mountain of documented wrongdoing. The remaining members of the HOA board panicked, faced with a lawsuit that could bankrupt the association and make them personally liable. They immediately caved. Their lawyer, a sensible woman who probably couldn't believe the mess she'd been handed, called Ben within 48 hours. She wanted to settle. All of it. An emergency HOA meeting was called for all homeowners. It was held in the community clubhouse, and it was standing room only. The atmosphere was tense and angry. Brenda's two board cronies sat at the front table, looking small and terrified. Brenda was not present, being out on bail and, I assume, under advice from her criminal lawyer to keep a very low profile. George had encouraged me to speak, and I agreed. I stood before my neighbors, not as a commander or a plaintiff, but just as a homeowner. I calmly and methodically laid out the entire story, from my first meeting with Brenda to her arrest on my lawn. Then, I projected the financial summary I had created onto a screen. I showed them the inflated landscaping contract. I showed them the proof that it was her brother's company. The room, which had been murmuring, fell silent. You could hear the gears turning in 100 heads as people started doing the math on their own HOA dues. I wasn't just a guy defending his property anymore. I was a guy who had uncovered a betrayal that affected every single person in that room. The meeting ended in an uproar. The two board members resigned, on the spot. A motion was made from the floor to elect an interim board, and George, to his surprise, was nominated and elected as the new president by a landslide. His first act was to formally accept the terms of my settlement offer. The settlement was a complete victory. The HOA would issue a formal public apology to me in the next newsletter. They would pay for all of my legal fees, which were substantial. They would pay damages for the vandalism to my sign. They would terminate the contract with Lushscapes LLC immediately and put all future contracts out for a transparent, competitive bidding process. And, most importantly, they would consent to a permanent court order acknowledging my sole and exclusive ownership of the lakefront property with no claim of access for the community ever. They also had to pay for a professional survey crew to install permanent, legally recognized markers along the property line. Brenda's personal story had a less triumphant end. She was convicted of criminal trespass and interfering with an officer. The judge, seeing the evidence of premeditation, gave her a hefty fine, a suspended sentence, and a year of probation, with the condition that she have no contact with me whatsoever. The civil suit, which her homeowner's insurance refused to cover due to the criminal nature of her acts, forced her to pay a significant settlement out of her own pocket. The public humiliation was total. A for sale sign appeared on her lawn less than a month later. I saw the moving truck one morning and watched as the white Lexus, its boss lady plates now a monument to irony, pulled out of Lakeside Meadows for the last time. In the months that followed, a sense of peace settled back over the neighborhood. A real peace this time, not the fragile, enforced quiet of Brenda's reign. George proved to be a fantastic HOA president, sensible, fair, and dedicated to transparency. The community finances were put in order, and our dues actually went down. The lake remained quiet, my private sanctuary. Occasionally, the Miller kids from next door would knock on my door and politely ask if they and their dad could go for a swim. I always said yes. I'd sit on my deck with a coffee, watch them splash in the cove, and feel a sense of rightness. This was the community I had hoped to find. It just took a little bit of suburban warfare, a mountain of evidence, and one well-deserved arrest to get here. It turns out, you can retire from the job, but sometimes you have to put the uniform back on, metaphorically speaking, to protect the peace you've earned. And I have to admit, there's a certain satisfaction in knowing that the most disruptive force in the neighborhood was brought to justice not by HOA rules, but by the simple, straightforward rule of law.